Hello, I'm Michelle Kotler, attorney, special education teacher, and creator of the Parents Playbook for Special Education Success. And I wanted to come back on YouTube and talk with you about the latest gut punch for children with special needs that has just been handed down by the Trump administration. Essentially, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services inside the U.S. Department of Education has been, for all intents and purposes, eliminated. And it's critical for parents to understand what that office actually did. And I hate to use the past tense. I can't believe I'm even using the past tense. Instead of saying what they do, I now have to say what they did. So essentially, $15 billion in special education funding is administered every year to the states by, we call it OSERS for short, by OSERS. OSERS was responsible for overseeing special education across the country to make sure that the states were following the law. And in earlier videos, I've given you examples of times when they absolutely were not following the law. And to ensure that they were staying in compliance with federal requirements, because sometimes a state may fall out of compliance without even realizing it. So OSERS was proactive, and they would do what we call compliance monitoring on a regular basis, and the states had to report to them and tell them what was going on. And they also were complaint driven. So if you filed a complaint, anybody could file a complaint. A parent could file a complaint. A teacher could file a complaint. Anybody could file a complaint to them, and they would investigate the complaint. And now that office has been completely decimated. So the watchdog that was put in place to ensure, to the best of their ability, that your child was receiving a free, appropriate public education essentially is gone. And this article in NPR's website says the office is the central nervous system for programs that support students with disabilities, not only offering guidance to families, but providing monitoring and oversight of states to make sure they're complying with the landmark Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the nervous system. So imagine that your brain and your spinal cord have been removed, and yet somehow your heart continues to beat and your lungs continue to work. So it's not a perfect analogy, because obviously if your brain were removed, those functions would stop. But let's just pretend that somehow your heart can continue to beat without your brain. So now your brain and your spinal cord have been removed. How effective, let's say you can continue to breathe and your heart can continue to beat by some miraculous analogy in Michelle's alternate universe here. But can you function? Can you function without a brain or a spinal cord? No, you cannot function. And in exactly the same way now, OSERS cannot function. They left a few people at the top so that they can continue to say that they have an agency, quote unquote, because it's illegal to eliminate an agency that was created by Congress. People do not understand separation of powers and what different branches of government are actually allowed to do anymore, sadly. But the executive branch cannot eliminate agencies that were created by law, by Congress. But what they've done is they've taken all the funding away, and they've fired all the people, except for a couple people at the top. So they can kind of say, well, the body is still there. It's still got a heart that's beating, barely beating, but it's a shell of a person, right? It's a shell of an agency, of an organization. And as far as kids with disabilities are concerned, it's no more. So based on multiple reports from staff and their managers, we believe that all remaining staff in OSERS, including the Office of Special Education Programs and the Rehabilitation Services Administration, have been illegally fired. So the Rehabilitation Services Administration was the federal arm that oversees rehabilitation services at the state level. Every young person, when they reach the age of 16 years old, becomes eligible. Every young person with a disability, I should say, and every adult with a disability is eligible for rehabilitation services in the United States of America. And that program actually helps people with disabilities find and retain gainful employment, so that they are not going to be on welfare and a burden to the states as a certain political party likes to complain about. So the organization now that was charged with actually doing that task and trying to support employment outcomes for individuals with disabilities has now been eliminated. So as challenging as that task was to begin with, now they've essentially made it impossible. And so the harm these cuts will cause for the 7.5 million students with disabilities across the country is only beginning. I can't even describe to you how important OSEP has been. They were, I can't believe, again, I'm sorry, I know I'm being redundant here. I can't believe I'm using the past tense. They, until today, had been the agency that interpreted the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and issued reams and reams of policy guidance and memorandums to the states. And parents' attorneys like me would rely heavily on that guidance when we would go to due process hearings to argue on behalf of children like yours. And that guidance was extremely valuable in helping us persuade hearing officers and administrative law judges that our interpretation of the law was correct because, look, here OSEP was saying the same thing, and you can rely on this, Your Honor, that this is, or, Mr. Hearing Officer, that this is an accurate interpretation of the legal requirements as applied in this particular case. Well, that organization is gone. They would intervene and enforce compliance with so many local jurisdictions and so many states on a wide variety of issues. Do you know that they even issued a memorandum stating that bullying, persistent and pervasive bullying, can rise to the level of a denial of faith? And that actually happened to a client of mine. I had this very sweet girl I represented in Washington, D.C., who unfortunately had been a cancer patient. This poor child had cancer, and she was fighting cancer. And the other kids in her public school in Washington, D.C. were so nasty to her and so mean and so violent that she was an emotional basket case. And this poor child was a nervous wreck. She was afraid of her own shadow. And we had to get her out of there. And the hearing officer, luckily in this case, found that the bullying that this poor cancer patient experienced in public school was so detrimental to her mental health and her education that she could no longer learn in that environment. And we got her placed in a non-public school called a private school in the real world. But in the law, we call it a non-public school. And we relied heavily on a policy letter issued by OSEP, the U.S. Department of Education, stating that bullying can become a denial of faith if school officials fail to intervene and stop the bullying and address the harm that's been caused by it, and the child suffers educationally as a result, then that can become grounds for placement in a non-public school at public expense, which is exactly what we had happen in my client's case. And now the organization that had that kind of a heart for children to advocate and fight for children and to help parents attorneys like me do that for your children, that agency is now gone. I'm shattered. I can't even comment on how devastating this is going to be, but this is going to be life-altering for millions of children. This is not hyperbole. 1 million children in America have disabilities. We don't even know all the harm that's going to come from this, but I can guarantee you this population, which is already so vulnerable and typically has such bad outcomes, now I don't even know what to say. I don't know what's going to become of them, but it's not going to be good. And I'll tell you what, there's another article that just came out that they're looking to move the special education money into what they call block grants and give the money to the states, which is their whole plan. They just want to take all this money and give it to the states to do whatever they want with it. And I'm very concerned that that money is just going to somehow disappear into the ether because there's not going to be any accountability anymore to the federal government about how that money is getting spent, because there's nobody left in the office that held these states accountable for the money. So that money can easily vanish and go God knows where to God knows whom. And the last people who are going to benefit from it are going to be your children. So let me tell you right now, this is the time, if you haven't started already, to learn everything that you need to learn about how to advocate for your child, and if necessary, how to try to get them placed in a non-public school at public expense. Because the educational services are about to go dramatically downhill in this country for children with special needs. And it's not going to be pretty. The people who are going to suffer for this are going to be your children. And as a tangent, if you're a caring, loving parent, you. So this is the time. If you've not checked out the Parents Playbook for Special Education Success, this is the time. Start learning what you need to know right now, because this is only going to go one direction and it's not going to be good. I wish I had better news, but unfortunately, Trump's war on people with disabilities continues, and there's nothing that we can do to stop it. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court allowed him to proceed with firing 500,000 people from the government. So I don't know what to tell you. Get started with the Parents Playbook today. It'll be the best investment you ever made. Good luck to you and to your children, and thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. I am turning off the comments because whenever Donald Trump is involved, as you can imagine, his trolls leave very nasty comments. So I've turned the comments off for this video. I normally ask people to leave comments, but honestly, I like to protect my peace and my mental health, and I'm not going to be reading those comments. I know that this information is accurate. Everything that I bring to you is accurate and correct information, including this. So I'm just not going to mince my words, and I'm not going to read any comments from those folks who think that he walks on water. So the comments have been turned off, but please do like, subscribe, and share so that other parents can learn this information as well. And thanks for watching. See you next time.